As the Big 12 Conference gets ready to officially expand and add their 4 new members for the 2023 season in Houston, BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati, which team is set up the best to take over the Big 12 or to at least compete for a Big 12 championship in year one? Is it the UCF Knights? Well, I have a very special guest coming on the show today to discuss just that. So pull up a chair, sit back, relax, and let's talk about it. What is up, college sports fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Couz, and welcome into another edition of Couz's Corner. Pull that chair up and let me serve you up another shot of top shelf college football content. Today's episode, I'm joined by a very special guest to discuss the UCF Knights, their successes on the recruiting trail and the transfer portal, and what the outlook is like for the Knights going forward as they join the Big 12 Conference in 2023. So without further ado, let me bring on my special guest, Mr. Christian Simmons. How we doing, Christian?
Good. Glad to be here.
Thanks for hopping on, man.
Yeah, sure.
Before we dig into the show, I want you to let my viewers and my listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, so if you're interested in more UCF content, you can listen to me and my co-host Bailey Adams on the Pegasus Podcast. We're pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you're looking for our written work, you can go to knightsportsnow.com. We got pretty much all the UCF coverage you could ever want between those two places. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So everybody be sure to go check out Christian and his partner's work. I'll put links to everything in the description box. Also, please, if you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel here at Couz's Corner. Obviously, I'm a West Virginia fan, as you can see, but I do cover all Big 12 content, especially new Big 12 content. I want to try to focus a little bit more on these 4 incoming schools going forward: the UCF Knights, the Houston Cougars, the BYU Cougars, and the Cincinnati Bearcats. Today, the focus is going to be on UCF. Really, what I think are doing a bang-up job in the transfer portal. So, Christian, let's touch on the transfer portal first. You and I were kind of talking a little bit off air, but fill us in a little bit on some of the successes the Knights have seen in the portal so far for 2023.
Yeah, so UCF has basically, since this new staff, Gus Malzahn staff, came in 2 years ago now, the portal has been a huge part of their philosophy. I mean, they basically looked at it as 50-50. They're last year, and they're looking to do it again this year. They're bringing in about as many high school guys as they are portal guys. There are 2 main reasons for that. The first one is they're obviously making the jump to the Power 5. That's a big jump, and they're trying to fill holes a little faster and take some shortcuts that's easier to do with fully developed guys through the portal. And the second reason is location. UCF's, in the middle of Central Florida in Orlando. There's a ton of high school talent that comes out of that area. And UCF hasn't been afraid to basically go into the portal and find guys who are basically looking to get closer to home and, get those guys in. So, I mean, they've got 9 transfers in this class so far. 4 of those transfers are from Florida. 4 of them are former SEC guys. And it's been a good mix because basically the way that UCF has looked at recruiting is you take high school as the guys that you want to see really compete in 2 years, really develop those positions. And then portal is fill the holes now. UCF, the O-line was looking, obviously you don't want to go into the Big 12 with a weak offensive line. They've gotten 2 starters out of the portal. They need to fix up the secondary. They've done that as well. So the portal's really sort of been about getting guys who can come in and start now, and then high school's your development guys. And that's been the path they've been taking, and it's been working so far. They've got a really good class coming in so far this year. So it's been a lot of success so far.
Yeah, and what we were talking about off air is, the way these outlets rate these transfer portal classes, huge discrepancy in the way 24/7 Sports does it, for example, who, by the way, I use 24/7 for majority of my work here on my channel and on my podcast. But so I really love those guys over there and what they do. But when you look at how they're rating the transfer portal versus the way somebody like an On3 is doing it, huge differences. 24/7 Sports is not really taking into account the guys who have left programs. They're only looking at what you've brought in, whereas On3 is taking both of those into account. And if you look at On3, they actually have UCF as the number 5 rated transfer portal class in the country right now. What do you think has led to that? I mean, talk about some of the big players they've gotten in the portal and some of the successes they've had there, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So last year, it's interesting you talk about 247 because Terrence Lewis, who was a former linebacker a former Maryland player who was a linebacker transferred into UCF, and that was like the top of the class for UCF in 247's eyes. And Terrence Lewis came into UCF, wasn't competitive, couldn't get on the field, and he's already transferred out. So I take the transfer rankings with a little bit of a grain of salt. And I understand because it's hard to rate. A high school, it's like you have years to evaluate these players, and transfer a lot of the time You haven't seen them in college in some situations. They hop in the portal, you try to do a quick eval, and that's all you can do. But yeah, UCF's had a lot of success. This year they've gone for an interesting mix of guys. One of their favorite things to do is to find guys who are playing at the highest level of the sport, who maybe want to get on the field a little faster and bring those guys in. They've done that with Christian Leary, who's an Alabama wide receiver, who that room's stacked right now. So they just brought him in, which last year, their leading receiver this year was Javon Baker, who was an Alabama receiver last year. So they've done that. They brought in Chauncey Magwood from Kentucky, another receiver. Amari Kite is a lineman who they're bringing in from Alabama. So Gus Malzahn knows the SEC. He loves to snatch SEC talent where he can, especially when it's guys with Florida ties. Then the other route they're doing, which has helped a lot too, is they go in both directions, which is what I like about their strategy. Is there's some programs out there where they say, okay, we're going to go take P5 guys who aren't playing, or okay, we'll go to FCS. And UCF's doing both. They've brought in some FCS guys. They brought in some group of 5 guys. Marcellus Marshall out of Kent State is going to start on the O-line for them this year. It's looking like they got Jordan Mask from Texas State. So that's been the big thing UCF's been doing, is they're not discriminating in where this talent comes from. They're willing to go in both directions to get it in. You've seen that on the field last year. I mean, one of their biggest impact players on defense was defensive tackle Ricky Barber. He came in from Western Kentucky. Then on offense, you've got Javon Baker from Alabama. So they'll get the guys wherever they can. And UCF has a good sales pitch. There's lots of guys with Florida ties who want to come back home, want to be near home. And also, UCF has, as far by group of 5 standards, they've got a pretty good NIL deal rolling. They've got a collective. That's all going well. It's a good place to live. Everything's changed since they can say they're going to the Big 12. So they're having a lot of success there right now.
So 2 guys I want to touch on specifically. One of them you mentioned, in Marshall, who you guys took from us, by the way. You didn't take him from us. He was not on our team. He was from Kent State, but West Virginia was going after him pretty hard in the portal. And he's a Morgantown, West Virginia native. So he's literally in West Virginia University's backyard, but yet he chose to go to UCF. So in my opinion, that was a pretty big win for you guys to get a kid from that far north. Obviously, I'm sure, wanting to live in Florida is probably a piece of that, but at the same time, I'm sure he was attracted to what Gus Malzahn and his staff were building there. And then the other guy I want you to touch on is, if you don't mind, is Fred Davis, the defensive back from Clemson. He's listed according to Rivals as as the number 20 and number 34 ranked transfer in this year's class. So, can you touch on those 2 guys for me real quick?
Yeah, sure. So starting with Marcellus Marshall, I'm as surprised as you that UCF landed him. When he went in the portal and I saw UCF was targeting him, it was like, okay, he's from Morgantown. West Virginia's after him. Pitt was after him as well. And that one was interesting. And that's kind of been part of the reason UCF's been having success is, like you said, it's just living in Orlando is a really easy pitch. And that's something that UCF's benefited from. They're very excited about the idea of coming into the Power 5 and being one of a small group of teams playing at the highest level of football that are in a metropolitan area or in a good area to live. And the other big thing there is their O-line coach is Herb Hand, who's had a ton of success, and he's a real players coach. Players love playing for him. And we've said before with him, it's like a lot of these O-line recruits, if you can get them in a room with him, then it's over. So I think that was a big part of that as well. And yeah, Fred Davis is another one where the pitch was easy for UCF because that's an immediate need they have. They've lost a couple guys to the portal with that position group. And he's another guy from Florida. He's from Jacksonville originally. And that's kind of what's made some of this stuff so easy for UCF is you can basically, when these guys start hitting the portal towards the end of the season, guys like Fred Davis, guys like Christian Leary, you pretty much just scour and you say, okay, who's from Florida who we want? And that's the start of your board right there. And so many of these guys are so interested in the idea of just coming home. And, a couple of years ago, that pitch wasn't the same because, coming home is a little less appealing when you're coming home to an AAC team versus when you have a Miami or a Florida State or a Florida right there. And now that UCF's been able to sell that, they've already, the second the season ended, they put the Big 12 logos on the field right before they hosted some of these transfers on an official visit. I mean, they're really hammering that home, and that's got guys like Fred Davis, like Marcellus Marshall more interested than they might have been 2 years ago.
Yeah, you can't blame them for that. And by the way, as a fellow Big 12 guy, we are really excited to have you guys and the other 3 teams on board with us. We're excited about the future of the conference. There's going to be some really, really good football games, basketball games. I think it'll be an exciting league. I think there's going to be a lot of parity in the league because I think the 4 teams that's coming in will be able to compete, maybe even in day one. I'm not sure with the teams that are already in the league. So I think it's going to be very exciting. I think, is losing Texas and Oklahoma going to hurt our pocketbooks? Absolutely. There's no way to deny that. You can't deny it or you're living under a rock. But I think the quality on the field and the excitement from a fan's perspective will be even better because I think any given year any team could win this league, and that excites me. So,
Yeah,
and
100%.
and now I have an excuse. Not that I need one, but now I will have an excuse to make a trip to Orlando to watch a football game.
There you go. Yeah, that's the pitch right there for UCF. But
Absolutely. But real quick, let's touch on high school recruiting a little bit. What are some of the UCF's big successes getting guys out of the high school ranks?
yeah, so high school recruiting's been going better than ever. And it was kind of two perfect things happening at the same time, which was Malzahn and the staff coming in, and then UCF also getting the Big 12 invite. Those have, that first spring when this staff showed up, that was before we knew about Texas and Oklahoma leaving, all the realignment, all of that. At that point, UCF was just still an AAC team. And UCF's recruiting strategy for basically the last 15 years has been very simple. You go to Florida, you stay in Florida, and you say, let's take all of the guys who are really fast, and if they're 4 inches taller, they'd be in the SEC. That's your recruiting strategy. And it's worked. That's how they built their 2017 team, their 2018 team, their 2013 team is guys who were, small and speedy and can basically kill you with their speed, but aren't necessarily like the size of Power 5 guys. And they've had a lot of success there. And when Malzahn came in, that changed really fast. And even before the Big 12, his vision was, we're going to go after the top guys in the state. There's no reason we can't do that. We're selling a lot here. We can make that happen. And there were guys, 4-star guys, even a couple of 5-star guys who UCF got on campus pre-Big 12, and they straight up said to the coaching staff, they said, I love your staff. The facilities are way better than I thought. This place seems great, but I'm a Power 5 player. I'm a Power 5 guy. And truth is, there was just, no matter what UCF does off the field, no matter what they build, no matter how good they get on the field, when you're selling home games against Temple or Tulsa or whoever to recruits, there's just some who aren't going to listen.
Yeah.
That's all changed in the 2 years since the Big 12 move. And the biggest thing this year is UCF was able to go head-to-head against Florida for a couple of guys and won those battles. They got John Walker, who's the number 101 prospect in the country. He committed to UCF over Ohio State in July, which in alone is even a crazy sentence to say. And then Florida came after him hard these last couple of weeks. They did get him on campus for an official week before signing day, and UCF managed to hold on to him. And that's been kind of the talk of recruiting in the state of Florida, because that's never really happened before, that UCF's able to steal guys away from Florida. Right. And then on top of that, they had Isaiah Nixon, edge rusher, number 268 player in the country. He flipped from Florida to UCF on signing day. So, and Florida didn't even realize that was coming until 2 days before. So high school recruiting's been going very well for UCF. Being able to compete not just with Power 5 teams, but with some of the in-state powers is really, really changing things quickly.
Oh, that's huge, man. Because we all know the mecca that high school football is in Florida. Probably, you could argue second best in the country as far as putting out talent behind Texas. Maybe even better than Texas. I don't know. I guess it depends on who you ask. But so if UCF can start getting some of those guys from Florida State, Miami, that's going to be huge. And I think, obviously they're already proving they can with some of these additions you mentioned. Real quick before we move on to the next topic, I want to remind everybody I'm here with Christian Simmons from the Pegasus Podcast. You can find him on Twitter at @CA Simmons. That's BYCASIMMONS. And then you can find me on Twitter at Couz206 at COUZ206 for those of you who are listening on podcast platforms. I'm proud to be a member of the Pigskin Podcast Network. Thank them for bringing me on as part of the TPPN family. But let's dive in real quick, Christian, to the upcoming bowl game. You guys are playing Duke on the 28th of December at 2 p.m. in the afternoon in the Military Bowl. So looks like Duke is favored in that game actually by 3.5, which is kind of surprising. But maybe not. But what are your thoughts going into that game? What do you think UCF's chances are in that game? Do you guys have anybody opting out? Those kind of things.
Yeah, so it's been a weird stretch. So as far as opt-outs, they've got the 3 starters who entered the portal: wide receiver Ryan O'Keefe, Devontae Brown, and then Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste. So apparently, which we're 2 days out here, but as of now, it sounds like there are no opt-outs. And I was skeptical of that when that came out a week ago, but everyone's traveled with the team so far, and they're all in DC now waiting to go play in that game. So as of now, no opt-outs, which is kind of surprising because there are a few guys who are expecting to try to have a shot at the NFL here. But honestly, it's all just going to come down to the health of Rhys Plumlee, the quarterback. He's been dealing with a hamstring issue basically the whole second half of the season, and it's really, really hurt them at times. They lost to Navy when he had to miss the second half. They were up 28-0 on their rival USF when he was in. He got hurt. They ended up losing the lead in that game late and had to come back on a late touchdown to win it. He then missed a big chunk of the conference title game to Tulane, and the offense was dead in the water when he was not on the field, and they ended up losing that game pretty badly. So he's had some time to heal up now. He's had almost a month. It's just a question of his health because they had another really good quarterback in Mikey Keene, who was his backup and actually started in 2021 and then lost the job to Plumlee when he came in through the portal. But he's transferred out now. He's headed to Fresno State. So their only other option is true freshman Tommy Castellanos, who has a lot of potential, but he's a true freshman. He's just not ready yet. So the bowl game, it's just kind of a question of how healthy JRP is going to be. If he's fully healthy, I think they can win that game. If he's not, it could get rough really fast.
Yeah. Now, does JRP have any more eligibility after this season?
He'll be back next year. It's a little, there are a couple other guys. They brought in Timmy McClain as a transfer. He was USF starting quarterback last year and sat out this year because he transferred late. And they've got Castellanos as well. And JRP, it's been, when he's on, he's really good, but he's had inconsistency. And we're kind of waiting to see right now if he's set to be the starter next year because he's also, as of now, going to miss all of spring camp because he's on the baseball team as well. But he is going to be back next year. So I would guess he'd be the starter, at least to start the season, but we'll see.
Good. And what about you? You mentioned you got 3 receivers in the portal?
No, just one receiver. Ryan O'Keefe.
Just one receiver.
Yeah, Ryan O'Keefe. So they've got 3 players in the 3 starters in the portal total, and Ryan O'Keefe's the receiver. So they have their other guys there.
I was going to ask you, man. That's because I was going to ask you about the depth of that position, but if it's just one guy, then it's probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah, they should be okay. They've got Javon Baker and Kobe Hudson, and the third spot's that position does get thin quick, so that actually might be an issue in the game, but they do have a couple of young guys they can throw in there to kind of see what they have with them at least, which is kind of what bowl season is becoming for a lot of teams at this point, is seeing what you have with your young guys, so we'll have to see.
Okay. Duke's favored by 3.5 in that game, this 3.5-point spread. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's about right?
Yeah, I'm not gonna scoff at it. I know on the surface you see UCF and you say Duke and you say why is UCF not favored in that game? But at the end of the day, JRP's health is a factor, and also UCF's defense was falling off at the end of the year here, and now they are down 2 starters who were in the portal, and Duke's got a really dynamic quarterback in Riley Leonard. So I'm not gonna sit here and get outraged about that. I think that UCF's best case scenario is if JRP is healthy, that probably does become a shootout just with the way the defense has been playing the last few games, and UCF. The other factor is the weather. It's going to be, I think, 30 degrees the day of the game. UCF not used to playing in 30-degree weather, so we'll have to see there. I think UCF's got a good shot if JRP's healthy, but if he still isn't, which is a possibility, then it's going to be tough.
Yeah, this is kind of off base, but what is the deal with all these bowl games in cold weather cities?
This is the first time UCF's left the state for a non-New Year's Six bowl since 2010, so they're not used to cold weather bowl games. This is going to be a weird adjustment for them.
I mean, a bowl game is supposed to be a reward for teams, but yet they send them somewhere where it's, in a lot of cases, colder than where they're coming from.
Especially UCF. You have multiple bowl games in the state of Florida that their conference does have tie-ins to, and they got shits to Maryland. It's kind of weird, but, you do what you can.
I mean, like, I remember back, I think it was 2000, after the 2012 season, West Virginia had, they went into the 2012 season. It was the first season in the Big 12. They were expected to compete for the conference title. They ended up finishing like 7-5, I think. They ended up getting, I think they played in the inaugural Pinstripe Bowl that year in New York, and they were not happy about it. And
what a reward for a season.
And it showed on game day, man, because it snowed, the weather was cold. I mean, our 3 best players were Tavon, Stedman, and Gino. And of course, Stedman and Gino were from Florida. They're Miami guys. Now, they have played in cold weather in Morgantown, but it's nothing like they saw in New York for that game. And they played like garbage, man. I mean, Syracuse and we ended up having to play Syracuse as an in-state school, which didn't help. So, I mean, it just wasn't. I'm thinking, what kind of reward is this? But I mean, one of the players, I think it was even Tavon, came out in an interview and said, we were kind of looking forward to going to Florida for a bowl game. So we're not real happy about it. They were straight up honest about the fact they weren't happy having to play in a cold weather game. So it's kind of surprising that you don't see more players opting out of these types of games. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. For sure. I'll be curious what happens too when it's we're 2 years out or a year out from the 12-team playoff era starting. I'll be curious the first time like an Alabama or a Georgia or someone like that has to go on the road to like an Ohio State in that round of on-campus games. That's gonna be a weird one.
It'll be weird, but I personally am looking forward to it. I don't know how you feel about the playoff expansion, but I think it's great.
Oh, I'm all for it. The UCF, of course, the UCF won 25 games in a row and was never ranked higher than 8th. So UCF fans are typically pretty pro expanding the thing.
I can imagine. And I think anybody who's a Big 12 fan probably should be, because that's going to be our best shot to get a team. I mean, obviously we got TCU in this year, but it's going to be harder to get a team in a 4-team format than it is if we get an auto bid every year where the champion's going to automatically get in. And There could be years we potentially get 2 teams in.
Right.
This year the Big 12 might have gotten 2 in. Kansas State could have gotten in this year.
Yeah, I saw someone put out if you take the format for 2024, it would have been Kansas State as well in that first round.
So yeah, I'm all for it, man. And if we can add more college football games on at the end of the season, I mean, anybody that loves college football ought to be a fan of that. But now there are some out there who are not, and I get it. But I personally am all for it. Not only from a West Virginia perspective, but also just from a college football fan perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like if you're a football, I mean, like you said, if you're a college football fan, you want more football. I feel like it makes the sport, it keeps things more national too. You're not just going to have 4 teams from, the same region in the postseason every year. You make sure the whole country's represented. I think that's all a good thing.
Right. Real quick, speak to you guys lost both your coordinators in the offseason. Can you fill the audience in on where they are in filling those roles? And
yeah, so Travis Williams was the DC. He'd been with Gus since the Auburn days, and he left to become the DC at Arkansas. That one, the destination was a surprise, but him leaving wasn't. He'd been sort of flirting with the Auburn job for a couple weeks, so we sort of knew that one was coming. Chip Lindsey, the offensive coordinator, left to take the same position at UNC. That one wasn't a surprise. It kind of been expected all year that he was going to leave. It's tough being an OC to Malzahn because you're not really the OC. I mean, Chip Lindsey was essentially the quarterback's coach with an OC title tagged on. There was a little bit of quarterback controversy this year between Rhys Plumlee and Mikey Keene at points, and it sounded like Chip Lindsey and Gus Malzahn maybe didn't always see eye to eye on that situation. So that one's not much of a surprise. So they're still waiting to fill OC. We don't know who it's going to be yet, but that position has a lot more intrigue now because Gus Malzahn has now said publicly that he's probably going to give up play calling and give up the offense to the new offense coordinator. And that's not really an issue that the offense hasn't worked with him calling it, because it has. It's just that he talked about that with the transfer portal being what it is, with NIL being what it is, with recruiting now being a year-round thing. It's gotten really hard for a head coach to handle all of that and then also be game planning week in and week out. And it might be easier for him to take on more of a CEO role and be the face of the program and let some younger offensive coordinator actually design and run the offense. So we'll see. We're not sure where they're going to go with that one. It's a bit of a mystery. The fact that it hasn't happened yet makes me suspect it's someone who's coaching in a bowl game right now, because we know that interviews have happened. So we'll have to wait and see.
Right. Yeah. And then the final thing I want to touch on before I let you go, Christian, is the entrance into the Big 12. Obviously, I know UCF fans are excited about it. Like you said, they put the Big 12 logos on the field immediately after their last game and whatnot. But what are realistic expectations for UCF? Do you guys expect to come in and compete for a Big 12 title day one? Do you think there'll be a 1 or 2 year gap between that, and it'll take them some time to adjust to the new level of competition? Or what are your thoughts there?
Well, if you ask some UCF fans, they'll say come in and win a title right away, because for the last 10 years, that's just sort of how UCF is used to things being. But that's not really reality. They're still working on. There were some really bad recruiting misses under the staff before Malzahn that they're still kind of digging out of and building that depth back. And the depth is really what they're missing right now. So UCF is kind of operating on a 2-year plan. And year one is come in and be competitive. That's where you're talking about if they have like a 7-5 season, something like that, you're comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. And then 2024 is the year they're really targeting, where now you're stacking. You've had these 2 really good recruiting classes where those guys should all be contributors now. You've been able to stack up through the portal. You've had time to sort out quarterbacks. So 2024 is really the year they're targeting for. Because long-term, UCF does want to be, which I don't think there's ever going to be another Oklahoma in this conference. I think there's too much parity. No one's going to come in and dominate the league year in and year out. But UCF's long-term goal is they do think they can be a top 3 team in that conference most years. And that's what they're working towards. So Is that going to happen in year one? Probably not. They're just not there yet, but they do want to get there pretty quick. So 2024 is kind of that year that's being targeted.
And I've been saying, and I'm not saying this just because you're on my show, because I've actually told some of my friends this, weeks ago. UCF is the one team of the 4 that were added. I think UCF is the one team that has the best chance of being a future powerhouse, because like the Oklahoma, because of, number 1, location. You're in Florida. Number 2, I just think, you look historically the last decade, that program, regardless who their coach has been, they have won football games, man. They've competed for conference titles. They've had undefeated seasons. They just continue to win. And I think that starts at the top. I think they've had great leadership over the years. You look at the size of their fan base, the size of their enrollment. That bodes well for the future as far as donors, as far as NIL, all of that. Because you think the age of a lot of these fans now are younger fans, and if they start giving to the program now, they're going to continue that year in, year out for the foreseeable future. And to me, the sky's the limit for UCF. I'll be honest with you. And one of my biggest fears is not only them coming in and being dominant at some point, but would they actually be attracted or attractive to a conference like the SEC at some point, or the ACC or whoever? Which I don't know that the ACC would be in a position to take them right now, but still, I mean, any of the other Power Five conferences may come in and try to pluck a team like a UCF away from the Big 12, and that kind of worries me a little bit. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, I hope it doesn't come across as cocky, but basically for the last 15, 20 years, UCF's been building to this moment of it's never been like, oh, if they get the chance to get in a power conference, it's when the opportunity comes. And I feel like for fans who maybe are not as familiar with UCF, it's easy to see the label Group of Five, and that's the label. But what you said is very true. UCF has been spending like a Power Five team for the better part of 20 years now. They're the largest school in the country by enrollment. They have 330,000 living alumni. The average age of the alumni is 35. So they've got money. It's younger money, but they do have that money. And they've had facilities for a long time. They were the first team in the state to build an indoor practice facility. They've got the stadium. They fill it. So the building blocks are there. And it really is, the whole issue has been what happens if, UCF gets $8 million a year from the AAC. And within a couple of years, that's going to jump to about $50 million with the new Big 12 deal, and you add on playoff revenue and everything there. So for what you're saying, that is the dream vision for UCF, is now that they have that Power 5 money and almost more as important, the Power 5 brand behind them, can they take off now and become what the administration has felt like basically for 20 years that they should be if they get in the right situation. So As far as going to the SEC or Big 10 eventually, I don't know. The thing I like about the Big 12 is what you said, and I think it's going to make it a valuable league as a TV property, is there's no Ohio State, there's no Alabama who's just going to steamroll every year and you never know. I mean, I think it's going to be a wide open league, and I think that makes for fun TV where you can have all of these games most years that matter, where teams are in it. With a 12-team playoff, you're playing for a playoff spot. So UCF is very happy to be in the Big 12, and I don't think they're looking past that yet, but they're really looking to take that next step in their evolution,
Right. And you guys are going to be in a situation a little bit, and BYU will be too, to an extent. You guys are going to be on somewhat of an island geographically. I mean, even West Virginia is going to be your closest opponent, and we're over 700 miles away.
Yep.
So that's where we've been for the last 10 plus years, 11 years. Our closest opponent has been Iowa State, who's over 700 miles away. So you guys are going to kind of be that lone entity down there in the Southeast. Do you think that would make it more tempting, so to speak, for a team like UCF to try to get into an SEC or an ACC even though the ACC is not making the SEC money? Do you think that geography would be an advantage there?
Honestly, no. And UCF's had a history of kind of always doing what you have to do regardless of geography. UCF played in the MAC in the early 2000s because they just moved up to FBS in 96. They didn't have an offer on the table from a BCS conference. So they said, who will take us? And the MAC said, we'll do it. And they said, great, that's a conference. It gets us into bowl games. We'll do that. And they've always kind of had to deal with that. I mean, even in the AAC, they had USF and State, but I mean, that's a wide-ranging league. You've got teams in Texas, in Philadelphia, in Oklahoma. So UCF's always had to travel a lot. It's not necessarily something that they're going to, I don't think they'd make a move based on that. I think they're always going to be focused on the money, and everything else will come from there.
Makes sense. And two, I mean, the Orlando airport travels to almost every city in America. So
right.
I'm sure that's not a huge issue for them. They can jump on a plane in no time and get to wherever they need to go. But what you will find in the Big 12, I think, is travel is probably a little bit trickier than some other conferences because most of your universities, like Lubbock, Texas, Morgantown, for example, and I could be totally wrong on Lubbock. I was just throwing out cities as an example because I don't know the airport situation. But there are a lot of cities in the Big 12 that don't have airports.
Right.
So you've got to fly into the closest airport, and then you may have to travel another 30 minutes to an hour on a bus to get to where you're going. So that, I don't know if you guys have had to face that some of your other conferences, maybe you have, but that's probably the one challenge to the travel in the Big 12 is it's just a bunch of small college towns that don't have airports. And but anyway, but we can all get to Orlando easily, which is
well, we're providing the easy trip, so
that's right.
No worries for the
other, I'll be honest with you.
Bases.
I'm going to try. I've heard great things about the bounce house. I'm going to try my best to get to a game in the future, whenever that is. And I can't wait to see the Big 12 schedule come out for 2023. Have you heard any updated timeline on when we can expect to see that, by the way?
UCF's athletic director told some boosters last week that it was supposed to come by February 1st.
Okay.
So it sounds like it was done, and then in Vegas they started renegotiating with Texas and Oklahoma when the exit was going to be, and once that happened, they pushed back the timeline. So
I got you.
we'll see. UCF fans are excited for it because it almost still it's like it's not really going to feel fully real until you get that schedule and you see those home games and where you're going to be playing. So
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Well, West Virginia fans are on edge too because we want to see who we're going to be playing next year because we've got our out of conference next year. We go to Penn State, and then we play Pitt at home. So our non-conference, we do have one quote unquote cupcake in there with Duquesne, but 2 Power Fives out of conference, man, and that'll be the 3rd year in a row that we've done that, I think. So,
doing Neil Brown no favors. His last attempt to
they did not.
hang on.
This schedule was actually set up by our previous athletic director, but even before Shane Lyons, Oliver Luck is the one who made this schedule. So I think they've tried to going forward. They're trying to not do that, but we still got to play out the rest of these these schedules, these contracts. But that being said, it'll be interesting to see if any of those games change because the way the Big 12 schedule could get lined up, the non-conference schedule could even change because of that, right? Because of dates and things like that. But anyway, Christian, I appreciate one more time, man. Before we hop off of here, let everybody know where they can find you online, on YouTube, on podcast platforms, wherever.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter @byCA Simmons. As far as the Pegasus Podcast, pretty much anywhere you're looking to get a podcast, we will be there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Looking for our written work, check out knightsportsnow.com.
And for those of you who are watching, you can see scrolling along the bottom of the screen, I've got my Twitter handle. I've got Christian's Twitter handle. So come interact with us. I'm sure he would love it. I love it. Please subscribe to this channel here. Please subscribe and follow the Pegasus Podcast wherever you find your podcast platforms. Please find Couz's Corner on your favorite podcast platforms as well. We're kind of new to the podcasting game, but hey, we're going to try to grow this thing as much as we can. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and as always, Q Country Roads. West Virginia, proud to mama, take me home.